Hey everyone, welcome. Tonight we're embarking on a unique journey, not to jousting tournaments or grand feasts, but into the remarkable, often harsh, lives of medieval peasants. These were the everyday heroes who, against all odds, faced some of history's coldest, most brutal nights. Their story is one of sheer grit, clever ingenuity, and an unbreakable determination to simply survive. But our journey won't stop there. We'll also witness the meteoric rise and tragic fall of a queen who shook a kingdom, relive the audacious spark of a revolution, and uncover the silent wonders of a forgotten ancient civilization. So, dim the lights, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We'll learn from those who endured, reflect on those who dared, and discover the quiet power of history. Chapter 1: The Peasants' Winter War. Mastering the Cold. When you think of medieval life, you might picture knights and castles, but for the average peasant, winter wasn't about merrymaking. It was about sheer survival. Imagine living in a tiny hut made of mud and sticks, walls so thin you could hear a bird sneeze, no insulation, tiny holes for windows stuffed with animal skin, and definitely no thermostat. Inside, it was just a polite couple of degrees above freezing outside. Congratulations, you were slightly less freezing inside. Nights were brutal. The wind howled like a ghost, and the fire in the hearth sputtered pathetically. If you weren't right next to it, you might as well have been outside. Peasants didn't have fancy fur coats. You had rough-spun wool tunics, maybe a cloak that smelled suspiciously of goat, and a desperate hope that layering would turn you into a human onion. Spoiler, it didn't really work. Beds were often just sacks stuffed with hay or straw, shared with fleas. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant risks, especially for kids and the elderly. Every morning you woke up still breathing was a minor miracle. Their homes were basically enthusiastic wind tunnels. Walls were wattle and daub, sticks crisscrossed and smeared with mud, straw, and, yes, animal dung. Dung was a cheap, sticky insulator, and it was always available. These walls didn't stand a chance against a real winter storm. The cold wind found every crack. Thatched roofs sagged, leaked, and sometimes let in local wildlife. Windows were tiny, covered with thin hides. Floors were just compacted dirt that turned into mud when it rained. Cold from below, cold from above, cold from every side. It was a three-dimensional assault. But peasants weren't whiners. They packed gaps with moss and old rags. They huddled together, human insulation at its finest. The frozen ground was another silent enemy. Their floors were just slightly flatter earth, maybe with some straw. You were sleeping one thin layer away from relentless cold. Peasants tried layering thick mats of straw or dried rushes, which became a living ecosystem of decomposing plants and fleas. Their beds offered little defense. Tossing and turning wasn't about comfort. It was a desperate dance to keep blood flowing and avoid freezing one side of your body. Surviving meant waking up with all your toes still attached. The true hero of medieval winter homes was the hearth, a simple fire pit, often with no chimney. Smoke just drifted out through holes in the roof or into your lungs. It wasn't ideal for breathing, but it fumigated fleas. The hearth was kitchen, light source, and entertainment. Letting the fire die out was suicidal. Rekindling it meant flint, steel, kindling, and a lot of prayer. So peasants banked the fire, burying embers under ash to keep them alive until morning. It was an art passed down through generations, often leading to arguments about the best technique. Sometimes families took turns waking up to check the coals, the medieval equivalent of sleepwalking to the thermostat. The more, the merrier was a winter survival tactic. Forget personal space. Entire households piled into the warmest corner, forming a desperate, snoring human lasagna. Babies and elders were tucked deep in the center. Body heat was strategic. This communal sleeping wasn't just survival. It was family bonding, leading to storytelling and conversations muffled under shared blankets. And then, their housemates, cows, goats, pigs, chickens. Bringing animals indoors was vital for warmth. The house became a chaotic living furnace. Chickens nested in corners, pigs snorted, cows lounged luxuriously. The smells were legendary, but peasants developed selective noses. More animals meant fewer frozen toes. Of course, there were hazards. A chicken using your hair as a perch, or stepping barefoot into something suspicious. But the math was simple. Cold kills, and cows cuddle, whether they want to or not. Fashion was about not dying. Peasants layered everything they owned. Scratchy linen under tunics, thick wool tunics, saggy leggings, a rough cloak, maybe a patched sheepskin. Boots were a luxury. Feet were wrapped in rags. Washing clothes was impractical. They'd freeze. So peasants smelled like smoke, sweat, and sheep. A small price for not freezing solid. This crime even offered a bonus: insulation, that greasy layer locked in body heat. A medieval Gore-Tex jacket. Hats, scarves, gloves were treasures. Children were swaddled into waddling turnips. Warmth was the only medieval flex. Even filth was strategic. Clean clothes were terrible at keeping you warm. Layers of grime, body oils, and mud clogged the fabric, making clothes wind-resistant. It was medieval weatherproofing. Washing often was believed to make you sick. Bathing was rare, laundry rarer. You became a walking museum of the past 6 weeks. Every stain a heroic story of not dying. In a world where everyone stank. Nose blindness was a way of life. Filth was fashion, function, and a sign you were winning at life. Their beds were rough wooden frames covered with sacks of straw, hay, or rushes, crunchy, lumpy, pokey, smelling of barnyard and regret. Some just slept directly on straw on the dirt floor, straw flattened and molded, attracting bugs. Changing it was a major event. Despite discomfort, these humble beds provided a crucial insulating layer, against the frozen earth, and clumping together created pockets of shared body heat. Medieval central heating, sealing up their mud and stick homes, was an art form. Peasants stuffed gaps with moss, straw, rags, even animal hair. Some daubed extra mud and dung on the outside. As an annual winter project, roof leaks were plugged with cloth or turf. Doors and windows, if any, were flimsy wood planks, often covered with animal hides soaked in fat. Every night was a battle against the sneaky cold, yet through cleverness, stubbornness, and a refusal to accept slightly frozen as a permanent state, they muddled through. They even adjusted their breathing. Deep, open-mouthed breaths pulled icy air into lungs, a risk for pneumonia. So they practiced survival breathing, shallow, slow, through the nose to gently warm the air. Parents scolded children for panting like dogs. Some slept with cloaks over their faces for a makeshift breath warmer. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. A full stomach was a secret weapon. Calories meant warmth. Eating something hearty before bed generated internal heat. Think thick stews with root vegetables, oat porridge, dense rye bread, maybe salted pork. It wasn't about presentation. It was about a friendly brick in your gut, slowly burning through the night. Fatty foods were prized. Parents made sure even picky kids ate turnips. Sure, vivid, bizarre dreams might follow, but it was worth it. Before electric blankets, they used hay boxes and heated stones. Hay boxes, lined with hay, kept cooked food warm for hours. Medieval slow cookers, they also used them for rocks. A flat stone would be roasted in the hearth, then wrapped in rags and tucked under the hay in the mattress, or at the foot of the bed. A medieval heating pad, a tiny miracle against the frozen earth. Proximity to the fire was prime real estate. Infants, the elderly, and the sick got first dibs. Parents and older kids fanned out like human insulation. Too close, you singed your hair. Too far, you camped in an icebox. It was a delicate dance. Pets and livestock muscled in too. A dog wedging itself between you and the fire. Chickens perching on hearthstones. Every crackle of the logs was a promise. You're still alive. You're still warm for now. No one survived winter alone. It was a village project. If your neighbor's house went dark, someone checked. Community meant survival. Villages had unofficial winter watchers. If a family's fire went out, a good neighbor rushed over with a glowing coal, or invited them into their smoky hut. Communal food stores were shared during brutal winters. Even children helped deliver wood. Old grudges were shelved. The village became one big, stubborn, fiercely determined family, and they prayed a lot. When the wind howled and the fire shrank, they sought divine intervention. Saints were front-line defense. Saint Blaise for throat ailments. Saint Nicholas for household protection. Some sprinkled holy water, marked doorways with chalk, or kept vigil candles burning. They promised to be kinder to turnip-stealing neighbors. If God just got them through the night, faith wasn't abstract. It was raw, urgent hope whispered into smoky rafters. But sometimes it wasn't enough. Winter won. Entire families, whole villages vanished. The Great Famine winter of 1315 was particularly cruel. Failure to keep the fire alive was a death sentence. Houses collapsed. Disease loved the cold. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, ears. Yet, what's haunting is the eerie normalcy of it. Death was just another neighbor. Still, they pressed on, clinging to life. One ember, one breath, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Their legacy is unglamorous victory, pushing humanity forward, making warmth and comfort common expectations for us today. Chapter 2. Anne Boleyn, the Queen Who Shook England. Now, let's shift from the harsh realities of peasant life to the glittering, yet equally perilous, world of Tudor court. Born around 1501, Anne Boleyn didn't enter the world with a crown. She was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, a noble woman with powerful family ties. Her birth barely made a ripple, but from these modest beginnings, something extraordinary was taking root. From an early age, Anne was set apart by her mind, clever, spirited, and magnetic. Her family sent her abroad for education. First, she served Margaret of Austria in the glittering court of the Netherlands, absorbing diplomacy and refined manners. But it was in France, serving Queen Claude and Queen Marguerite, that Anne's brilliance was polished. She mastered conversation, intrigue, and commanding attention without seeming to seek it. By the early 1520s, she returned to England as something rare, a woman who could rival continental courtiers, carrying the ambition of a rising English house. She wasn't a classic beauty, but she was arresting, dark eyes sparking with intelligence, a quick musical voice, a purposeful way of moving, and didn't just enter rooms. She changed their gravity. When Anne returned to the English court, she was unlike anyone the nobility had ever seen. In a world of pale, modest English roses, Anne was a thunderstorm, electric, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. Her sharp wit set her apart. As a maid of honor, the Queen Catherine of Aragon, Anne's presence flickered too brightly to snuff out. She danced gracefully, spoke French with ease, and laughed with a confidence few women dared display. Men noticed. Women gossiped. It wasn't long before she caught the most dangerous attention of all, King Henry VIII. Henry was no stranger to flirtation, but Anne was different. She didn't swoon or fall eagerly into his arms. She teased. She challenged. She refused. Henry, used to instant adoration, was captivated. The more she held him at arm's length, the deeper he fell. Letters passed, filled with longing. Henry offered her the role of royal mistress, astonishingly, and said no. She would not be just another conquest. If Henry wanted her, he would have to make her his wife. This was an audacious gamble. The king was married to Catherine, beloved by the people, and protected by her nephew. the Holy Roman Emperor. The church would have to be defied, but Anne didn't flinch. She knew ambition was a dangerous game, and she intended to win. Henry's desire for Anne spiraled into a national crisis. He was obsessed. He convinced himself his marriage to Catherine was cursed because she'd been married to his brother Arthur. He insisted his soul was damned unless he annulled the marriage. Anne, for her part, remained just out of reach, alternately encouraging hope and maintaining distance. Every glance, every word was measured. She was positioning herself to become queen. The court erupted into factions. Diplomats wrote desperate letters to Rome. Foreign monarchs threatened. Henry's advisors shifted uneasily. As months turned into years, Henry's frustration grew. He bombarded the Pope with petitions, seeking loopholes. He began to realize the church wouldn't bend easily. Catherine had powerful allies. Still, Henry pressed on, defying advice, tradition, and increasingly the law. His courtship with Anne became a challenge to the very structure of England's political and religious life, and wasn't just capturing a king's heart. She was dragging an entire kingdom into uncharted waters. A dangerous game had begun. After nearly 7 agonizing years, Anne's gamble paid off. In January 1533, she secretly married Henry VIII, still technically married to Catherine. By June, Anne was crowned Queen of England in a lavish ceremony. It should have been her crowning moment. But the atmosphere was far from joyful. People muttered prayers for Catherine and entered her queenship as a storm. Dazzling, provocative, and politically savvy, she wore bold colors, commanded the court with sharp intelligence, and made powerful enemies quickly. Her position, while seemingly secure, was terrifyingly precarious. Everything rested on one thing: providing Henry with a male heir. In September 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, and masked her crushing disappointment, insisting the next child would be a son. Henry, however, now flickered with doubt. Still, for a time, Anne's star burned brightly. She reshaped the English court, elevating her family. She became the first English queen crowned with sacred oil, usually reserved for kings. Her influence was vast. Henry began moving England away from Rome, creating the Church of England with himself at its head. Also, Anne's crown couldn't be questioned. Yet even in her triumph, dark clouds gathered. Rivals circled, and Henry, ever fickle, was already beginning to look beyond the brilliant woman for whom he had torn a kingdom apart. The higher you rise, the harder the fall. Cracks in Anne's world showed quickly. The pressure to produce a male heir was immense. She suffered multiple miscarriages, physically weakened and emotionally battered. Each lost child chipped away at her foundation. Henry pulled away, his disappointment carving rifts. Anne, never one to suffer in silence, fought to keep her place. But Henry grew tired of her sharpness, her defiance. Outside, enemies gathered. Catherine's supporters never forgave her. Even commoners whispered, blaming her for the schism with Rome. Then came Jane Seymour, quiet, demure, everything and was not. Jane captured Henry's wandering attention as Anne's influence waned and tried to reclaim her position, promising more sons, begging for patience. But the king had already begun imagining life without her. Anne's political enemies, including Thomas Cromwell, once her ally, sensed the changing tide. They began laying the groundwork for her destruction, gathering accusations, rumors, and witnesses. The woman who had played the dangerous game so masterfully was now losing ground. Anne's enemies attacked with whispers, secrets, and carefully sharpened lies. Cromwell, once her ally, turned against her. Anne's boldness made her dangerous. Henry wanted an exit, and Cromwell offered a solution: remove Anne, not by humiliating divorce, but by disgrace. The accusations were wild: adultery, incest, conspiracy against the king. Anne, the proud queen, was painted as a betrayer. Cromwell gathered twisted evidence, coaxing confessions under torture. Several men, including Anne's brother George, were arrested. The charges made little sense, riddled with contradictions, but in Henry's court, truth was whatever the king needed it to be, and fought desperately, appealing to Henry's memory and love. But it was no use. In May 1536, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. As the gates slammed shut, she knew the truth. She was no longer a queen, but a prisoner. The betrayal had sealed her fate, and faced a tribunal of nobles, many of whom owed their fortunes to her. Now they sat in judgment, prepared to erase her. The charges were shocking: adultery with multiple men, including her brother, high treason, and defended herself with the same fire that had won Henry's heart, denying every accusation with intelligence and unwavering composure. She reminded them of her sacred coronation, her loyalty, her love, but it was all for nothing. The verdict was decided. It was a public unmaking. Witnesses spoke damning words. Evidence was flimsy and was found guilty. George and the others were also sentenced to death and would be executed by beheading, a merciful sentence compared to a traitor's death. She stood tall, pale but fiercely intact, declaring her readiness to die and praying for God's mercy. The court exhaled. The storm was nearly over, but they didn't understand. They were not erasing Anne Boleyn. They were immortalizing her in tragedy and legend. Returned to the tower and prepared herself. She prayed, confessing no crimes, believing she had committed none. She wasn't afraid to die, only prayed her death would bring peace to the kingdom and mercy to Elizabeth. Her loyal ladies wept and comforted them. She joked bitterly about being remembered as a queen who lost her head. Henry showed no mercy. Already turning to Jane Seymour, on May 18, 1536, Anne was told she would die the next morning. She spent her final hours praying, asking forgiveness for all who wronged her. Henry arranged for a French swordsman, a small mercy at dawn, and dressed carefully in a dark gray gown, a crimson kirtle beneath, colors of dignity. She pinned up her hair under a simple cap. On May 19th, 1536, and Boleyn ascended the scaffold in the Tower courtyard. A small crowd gathered, silent. She stood tall, thin but calm. No hysterics, just fierce dignity. She spoke briefly, choosing her words carefully. She didn't accuse or defend, but prayed for the king's health, offering forgiveness. Her courage stunned even her enemies. The sword flashed, and Boleyn, queen, mother, history maker, was no more. She was buried quickly in an unmarked grave. A queen once crowned in gold, now left to vanish without ceremony. Yet Anne's story didn't end. Her daughter Elizabeth, whose birth had disappointed a king, would rise to become Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs, and Boleyn changed the course of England forever. Her ambition triggered the break with Rome and the birth of the Church of England. Her fall showed that even queens could be cast aside. But through Elizabeth, Anne's legacy blazed brighter than any crown. She won a kind of immortality, not through survival, but through her indelible impact on history. Chapter 3: The Boston Tea Party, Brewing a Revolution. Finally, let's step back in time, far beyond nights and revolutions, to a place that rewrites human history, long before the towering pyramids of Giza, before Mesopotamian cities buzzed, before Stonehenge stood. There was Carol, hidden in the dry valleys of coastal Peru. Carol rose in silent majesty nearly 5,000 years ago, then faded into near-complete oblivion, swallowed by sands and forgotten. For centuries, the world didn't even know it existed. The Soup Valley, where Carol thrived, seems an unlikely place for civilization. Parched, barren, the river a thin silver thread. Most eyes would see it as inhospitable. Yet here, amid desolation, one of humanity's earliest great cities took shape. Carol wasn't scattered huts. It was a planned city sprawling over 150 acres, filled with pyramids, plazas, residential quarters, and ceremonial spaces. A complex society blossoming centuries before the Egyptians began stacking their own pyramids. The people of Carol achieved this without the wheel, without written language, without metal tools. They built massive structures from stone and earth with sheer ingenuity, communal effort, and human will. Yet for thousands of years, Carol's existence remained a secret. Travelers mistook its weathered mounds for natural formations. No one imagined that beneath the sand lay one of the oldest cities in the world, predating civilization's history books crowned as the first. It wasn't until the late 20th century that archaeologists, led by Ruth Shady, uncovered the truth. What they found buried in the dust would rewrite the story of the Americas and force the world to reconsider what it thought it knew. About civilization's birth, Carol had risen, flourished, and fallen in total anonymity. Now, After millennia of silence, its stones are speaking again. The Soup Valley looks like a struggle for life. Harsh winds, endless sand, merciless sun, scarce water. But the people of Carroll saw a canvas to be shaped. They tamed the river's floods, building simple but brilliant irrigation systems. Where others saw dust, they coaxed green shoots, cotton, beans, squash, guava. Cotton became their treasure, spun into fishing nets and textiles, fueling trade with coastal villages. They understood desert survival required balance. Working with nature, their homes and plazas were designed to withstand heat and rare, punishing rains. They studied stars and seasons, planning harvests with precision. Trade became the veins of Carroll's economy. Dried fish, cotton, fruits flowed up and down the coast. In return, Carroll received exotic goods, colorful shells, rare stones from the Andes, ideas from distant peoples. They were connected, not isolated. Carroll thrived through intelligence, innovation, and community, partnering with the desert to build an extraordinary society. Rising out of the desert, Carroll's pyramids defy what we thought about early American civilization. These weren't crude structures. They were massive, deliberate works, built with vision and organization. The Pyramid Mayor, over 450 feet long and nearly 60 feet high, was a feat of engineering comparable to ancient wonders. Built from stone, mud, and woven reed bags filled with rocks. It was designed to endure not just climate, but punishing earthquakes, and endure it did, standing for nearly 5 millennia. But Carroll's pyramids weren't tombs. They were centers of ceremony, power, and public life. Temples and gathering spaces crowned their summits. Accessible by broad staircases, fires burned atop these platforms. Rituals were held beneath the Peruvian sky. At their feet, vast, sunken, circular plazas invited thousands to gather for religious ceremonies, political meetings, and celebrations. Carroll cityscape suggested a society that prized community and order, deeply connected to one another and the cosmos. The pyramids were aligned with celestial events, sunrises, solstices, star cycles. Architecture wasn't just practical. It was spiritual, mathematical, cosmic. These structures were raised without metal tools, the wheel or beasts of burden, yet with symmetry, scale, and staggering precision, built to connect earth and sky, community and cosmos, humanity and eternity. They still whisper across the sands. Among Carroll's ruins, something profoundly different stands out. No weapons, no defensive walls, no mass graves. Unlike kingdoms built on war, Carroll was a society built on peace, a revelation that defies expectations. They invested energy not in armies, but in architecture, astronomy, music, and communal life. Their plazas and pyramids weren't monuments to victory. They were centers of celebration and governance. This was a civilization that chose to gather rather than conquer. to negotiate rather than destroy. Trade was Carol's lifeblood. Cotton was spun into fishing nets, traded for dried fish, an essential protein source. Exotic goods flowed in, shells, stones, tropical fruits. This wide trade network stitched the region together into a peaceful web of mutual benefit. With Carol as its hub, religious and ceremonial life maintained harmony. Grand public spaces and sunken plazas were stages for rituals that united people under shared beliefs. Music filled these gatherings, flutes from condor bones, drums from deer hides. Leadership relied less on military strength, more on spiritual authority and civic organization, coordinating massive projects without brutal scars of war. In an ancient world defined by conflict, Carol was a shining exception, a reminder that civilization can be built by collaboration, creativity, and trust. Carol was alive with sound, ceremony, and rhythm. Archaeologists uncovered a treasure trove of instruments, flutes from condor bones, whistles from deer antlers, small drums crafted with care, tuned to specific notes, designed to carry sound across vast plazas in a world without written language. Music spoke the soul's language. Imagine drums at dusk, flutes keening like desert wind, feet stamping on plazas under fading light, fires crackling on pyramids, priests chanting to gods of river, earth, stars. Carol was a symphony. The layout suggested ritual life at its core. Plazas and sunken courts designed as ancient amphitheaters, focusing sound and sight. Pyramids linked earth to heavens. Rituals marked seasons, harvests, stars. Music was a bridge. No violent murals, no terrifying gods of war. Carol's spiritual world seems to have been harmony, celebration, reverence. Even today, the desert wind whistles, and you can almost hear it. Carol was a marvel of engineering in a harsh landscape. Without metal tools, the wheel, or draft animals, they shaped a city that endured nearly 5,000 years. Massive pyramids built with enormous stones, transported using reed bags, layer upon layer of stone and rubble, designed to withstand earthquakes. Flexible construction, layered fills, wide foundations, rounded corners, engineering born from intimate knowledge of the earth. Water management was another triumph. Sophisticated irrigation systems guided river water to fields. Even during dry seasons, no water wasted. Urban planning was brilliant. Major structures aligned with astronomical points. Sunken plazas were instruments for tracking heavens, crucial for survival. Residential zones, administrative areas, ceremonial centers were arranged in harmony. They built for generations. Today, modern engineers marvel. Greatness isn't just technology. It's understanding nature. Carol stones endured storms, quakes, erosion, standing as a silent testament to engineered dreams. For centuries, Carol flourished. Then, quietly, almost without a trace, it was abandoned. No fires, no conquest scars, No mass graves. It's simply faded. Its plazas emptied. Pyramids left to sands. Flutes silenced. Why? A lingering ghost of a question. Scholars believe environmental change, a long drought, crippled agriculture, trade networks faltered, perhaps shifting trade routes diminished Carol's influence as neighboring cultures grew, or internal decline, political struggles, religious upheaval, exhaustion. Without written records, we can only imagine. The departure seems gradual. Families drifted away, seeking fertile valleys. New beginnings. Children who ran across Carol's plazas grew up telling stories of a lost city that faded into legend. The desert reclaimed what humans built. For nearly 4,000 years, Carol remained hidden, a whisper beneath sands. Today, archaeologists uncover its stones. How does a city so advanced, so beautifully crafted, simply vanish? Perhaps even the greatest civilizations, no matter how wise or peaceful, are fragile threads in time's tapestry, vulnerable to unseen forces of change. Carol stands as a silent giant, reminding us civilization's root stretch deeper than we believed. Its stones whisper a story reshaping our understanding, not of conquest and bloodshed, but of harmony, ingenuity, and hope. Long before Greece, Rome, or Egypt, Carol built something extraordinary. They raised pyramids without the wheel, mapped stars without written records, created a thriving society rooted in trade, music, ritual, and engineering, all without war. Carol offers another vision of civilization, connection over conquest, knowledge over domination. It reminds us complexity doesn't require violence. Greatness isn't measured by armies, but by a community building, creating, dreaming. Carol challenges old assumptions that civilization had a single cradle. It proves humanity's spirit of innovation arose independently, in many corners, driven by eternal desires to endure. Celebrate, reach for the divine. Walking among Carol's ruins, you can almost hear it. Drums, flutes, traders bargaining, children laughing under endless stars. Their lives, dreams, stories etched into Earth's bones. Carol teaches that even when civilizations fall, their spirit endures, sleeping under sands, waiting to be remembered, to inspire. In history's timeline, Carol shines not just as a relic, but as a beacon for the future, a reminder that even in harsh deserts, even under heavy sands, seeds of wonder, wisdom, and peace can take root and build a world that reaches for the stars.